guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Yvonne from GingerChickRehab. I am so glad to have you back checking out what I am up to. So in today's video, I'll be making over 7 benches, 7 little stools, 7 little places to sit things on, to sit on yourself, or just some pretty decor. Let's start off with our first piece. This was a Goodwill find, and to me, I would consider this a bench, but that little lip in the back kind of made me wonder just a bit. But it is a nice, solid MDF board, means that it's a pressed board type of piece. So it's definitely got some layers of dust on it that I'm going to get off and see what's underneath. Other than a little bit of water damage on the top, this is a nice solid piece. You know, another man's trash is another person's treasure. They just don't see the same thing that we all see. So I'm just taking some 220 sandpaper to give it a nice scuff sanding. But after I got it all sanded, you can see I didn't want to go with a power sander. Sometimes that's a little strong and it'll go down past the MDF board and cause some other issues. So hand sanding it, it didn't take too much. So I just am going over with some Rust-Oleum paint and primer in the flat black to cover this back up black. I know it was already black, but like I said, it had scratches, it had wear, it didn't really have a finish on it. But it's a nice, solid piece. Now, when I was working on this piece, I had a tag that I took off that said something about a TV. So I guess this was supposed to be a TV stand, but I'm repurposing it into a bench. And if you are new to my channel, I actually feel like it's been a hot minute since I've actually done some grain sack stripings, and I think this piece is perfect. So what I'm doing here is I'm centering my first piece of tape with the inside of the leg. That way I should be centered with on both sides, because I'm going to do some striping on one side and some striping on the other side, and then some wording in the middle. So I'm really going to concentrate to get my first piece of tape down nice and straight and level. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay another piece of tape on both sides, one on the left, one on the right, and then remove that middle tape, and that's where my first paint stripe will go. Now it took me 2 coats of paint to cover. I'm just using my Kills paint and primer and the flat white to color in my stripe. And now I'm going to make one more stripe, but I'm using my 1/2-inch tape and my regular masking tape. So my 1/2-inch tape is going to be where there will be no paint. And then I laid another piece of the masking tape, the same size as I used for this first stripe, in the middle, and then another piece on the other side. And then I'll remove that middle, and then I will proceed on painting my next stripe. That I have my stripes done on both sides, I am using a JRV stencil. I love this stencil. Now what I did was tape off. The masking tape is where I know I was centered with my measurements. I put a little bit of spray adhesive on the back of the stencil to keep it in place. And I'm going to do that same Kills paint and primer. And I'm using a stencil brush. I think this one is just from the Dollar Tree store, just to have a dry brush very gingerly put it in, because when it comes to this type of stencil, unlike my paint stripe, I'm not going to go back twice. So now that it's good and dry, I always like to help it along with a blow dryer to make sure that it's dry before removing my stencil. So now I'm going back in with some 220 sandpaper and making sure that my stencil is nice and flat in case I got any raised areas. Now that I have that whole top sanded, I'm going back in with antiquing wax. And I like a little bit of antiquing wax on my white stencil. It just gives it a little bit of age, makes it look like it's always been there just a tad bit more. So just straight antiquing wax. I'm going to actually do it over the entire bench. So it's a wax on, a wax off, or wipe off the excess. So my last step on this bench is to seal everything in with a couple coats of polycrylic. This poor little bench was being dragged to the end of the road when we were walking up to a garage sale. The neighbor just happened to be having a garage sale, and the other neighbor thought, well, this is a great way to get rid of some of my stuff I don't want, as they were moving. So we picked this little beauty up for $2. But I am definitely not a fan of that outdated red color, but it is nice and solid. So let's see if I can take my time sanding and get through that very shiny top coat and get that reddish stain off of this. Was able to get all that off the top, so I did a lot of taping and some contact paper from the Dollar Tree store to protect. I did scuffed sand the bottom, and now I'm going to be priming the base of this. And I was told that this red primer really will help eliminate your bleed through. So I actually used it on a previous project that I didn't have. I knew I wasn't going to have any bleed through problems, but I know with this red, I may have some bleed through problems. And the last time I went looking for shellac, the local store was out of it. So I grabbed this, and let's see how it works. Now that my primer is dry, and it says on the can that it dries in within 15 minutes, but I like to wait an hour just to be safe. And so now I'm using my Kills Paint and Primer and my TrueCoat Graco handheld sprayer, and it looks like it is covering and attracting that paint really well. I was actually able to get this finished up in one coat. I had to flip it on the other side to get the areas that the sprayer did not get, but I didn't have any problems with any of my white paint yellowing from the underlying stain. So maybe the red really did work wonderfully. So now all I'm doing is I took all that tape and the contact paper off my top, and there's always that hard crusty edge that I don't like the feel of, so I'm just taking my sander and just sanding that nice and smooth. It's just something about that natural look and that clean white. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going in on the white, and I want to seal that in. It's a paint and primer, and you don't have to do this, but I just like to protect my paint, so I'm going in with some polycrylic and giving it a nice misting. So now as I want to wax the top and leave it natural, I have been down to very little of a can of Varathane wax that I actually got from a viewer, Kelly. And now I just was sent another can by another viewer, Michelle. You don't even know how much this means to me, because we cannot find it here locally. They don't ship anywhere near our area. They only ship to big cities, is what I've been told by viewers who've contacted the company. So it is huge to have somebody share and go out of their way to buy the Varathane wax that I absolutely love. And on this raw wood, it is just going to absorb it right in and be its finished coat. So what I've got here is my Annie Salone waxing brush, and yes, I've got this nice and smooth, and now all I'm doing is applying that wax, and I'm going to end up applying 2 coats, because the first coat on this really dry wood will get soaked right in. I'm going to let that dry an hour or so, and then apply a second coat. But thank you to Michelle, that I can actually do some more waxing, because I can't even tell you how many emails I get, like, where do you find it? How do you get it? Because of wonderful viewers like you that go out of your way to share with your kind hearts. So yes, and I did the soft wax from Minwax that I get on Amazon. Seems to have gone up in price. It must be hard to get that also. So what a blessing this is. on to this pair. Now this was an estate sale find. It was the last day of the estate sale. Now these are nice, chunky, a little bit wider than I'm used to, that saddle type of stool. They were $5 a piece, so not a bad purchase at all. There's a couple different ways you could have dealt with that veneer lifting. You could have tried to take it all off, but of course 100% of it was not lifting. Yeah, about 25%. So I am just using some Starbond CA glue and the accelerator that helps it dry, holding it down until it is secure again. I'm going for the easier fix here than trying to remove all that veneer. So not only was it the veneer popping from underneath, but it also was popping from the sides. So now I'm taking some sandpaper, the 220 sandpaper, and just making sure that it is nice and smooth. And then there's no need for me to take the heavy power sander off over the rest of the piece. All I'm doing is just taking a 220 sandpaper by hand and scuff sanding it. So that gives something for my paint to grab onto. I have my problems fixed of the popping veneer, and I have everything sanded and scuff sanded. It's time to give it a good cleaning with some KRUD cutter deglosser. Now for this piece, I envision the bottom of this black. I've got it all prepped, it's all dried, and now I'm using the Rust-Oleum paint and primer in the flat black, just like I did on that previous bench. The nice thing about this paint, it is universal because it does wood, metal, MDF board, anything that your little heart could desire, I guess it will spray. And I definitely love spraying pieces like this with all those details. I don't want to spend the time brushing, so this is just going to get a nice black coat. That my black paint is dry, and I only did the bottom. I did have to flip it up. I sprayed it with some polycrylic, and apparently I got a little bit on the heavy side. So I'm just using a very soft bristle brush with very gingerly touching to get any of those drips and runs. It is always funny, just depending on the condition or how close you are to an item, if you get drips and runs. So I'm constantly looking for them. Now, is this the perfect paper or what to finish off these stools? I love the Reusable paper. I love that this has 3 different sheets that you can use. So one of my best sellers, as soon as I put it in the booth, is this red grain sack with these chickens and these cows. And my only hard decision when it comes to putting it on a bench, do I want to off-center it or do I want to keep it in the middle? Now, the one thing that I like to do is to take off that hard edge. I know where I cut it with the scissors, I do not cut straight. So to make it look like that perfectly imperfect and that it has been worn with time, I just gingerly go in with my mouse sander. I learned not to use my vacuum system the first time I did this with our new our new sander. It was hooked up to the vacuum, and I couldn't figure out why it kept getting sucked in. So remembering to take off my vacuum system before doing that. But I just like to fray those edges just a little bit. It really blends on the object a lot better. And I'm sure my regular viewers knew that I was going to center it. I couldn't help myself. Just that perfect red grain sack stripe. So to glue this on, I am just going to be using polycrylic. It always seems that I find a use for the leftover pieces and parts of the decoupage paper. So all I'm doing here was just making sure that I got it past where the wording was, even though I'm going to go ahead and make sure that it's glued. I'm worried about this project right now, and then I can use my leftover piece, whatever's left, on another project. How about you all? I just can't throw any little pieces of parts, especially when they have a wording that just makes another smaller project fun. So all I'm doing is putting some down, just gingerly spreading it down. I'm not too worried about wrinkles. If they happen, they happen. I can iron them out with some parchment paper once the polycrylic is dry, but I just love the perfectly imperfect of it all, and I love how this just quickly and easily transforms a piece. Now after that polycrylic is dry, I'm going to go back in with some 220 sandpaper, and I'm just going to go ever so lightly. I don't want to sand all the way into the wood to distress the wood. I just want to use this to cut off that excess paper. So now that I have the paper off, I'm going back in with that same sandpaper. I'm just taking the shiny off of the top of this and then making sure that I don't have any leftover polycrylic. I tried to wipe it off after I applied it. I love see how that paper just blends really well. You can see that little bit of overlap where it's a little bit shiny. I want to get that off. It really doesn't matter when you do this step or if you do this step, but just heating up the paper. I have some parchment paper underneath my no steam iron. It will help eliminate any more wrinkles if you choose to do so. Like I always say, I don't mind that perfectly imperfect of the wrinkles, but I do a lot of times use it to help me dry on my project a little bit faster. I am a little bit impatient here and there. And then if this is a look that you like, you can go ahead and leave it. But for me, I like to do a little bit of antiquing wax. So this is going to blend the top of this together. I'm just going to go ever so gingerly into that paper. Just make it look like it's a little bit dirty, a little bit worn in time. Now before sealing in my top, I have one more thing I'd like to do. So I'm taking some 150 sandpaper on all the sharp edges, and I'm going to go ahead and distress them and pop that wood underneath. That's just going to tie this top, and it's going to tie that bottom together. And then I'm going in with some steel wool, some fine grit steel wool, and just smoothing out the rest of the entire piece. And I'll finish up this bottom with that same antiquing wax. That's just going to richen up that black paint. It's going to give a layer of protection, and it's going to pop those areas that I sanded down to that raw wood. And now I will finish these up with a coat of polycrylic, and then also I'll do a couple coats on the top to make sure that that paper is good and on there. You ever look at a piece and you get ready to do it and you're like, I cannot believe that I paid money for this piece, but look at how cute this little stool is. It is so similar. It probably is the same exact stool, maybe, I don't know, than the one that I sanded down. But now you can see why I'm saying that. It is, yeah, I paid $5 for this. It was at a church thrift store. You know, it's always going to a charity of some sort. But everything needs to be re-glued and tightened down before I can even start working on it. So unfortunately, some of the spindles I just can't get out, like the legs. So this fix is going to be CA glue because it will get down there. It's thin enough that it'll get down into those spots, and that I can use the accelerator in 15 seconds. It should be dry and held in place. I want to make sure that all my legs are secure before moving on to the cross braces. As you see, those are all the way pulled out. The cross braces, I'm just going to be using the Titebond quick set because I'm impatient, and I'm going to need to clamp these together to pull this all tight. So these are out. I'm going to put glue around it, the spindle part itself, and then stick it in the hole, and I'm going to do it on the other side, make sure that everything is all glued up before clamping and sitting it off to the side for an hour or so. Now that I've got everything glued back together and it's nice and tight and I have a lot of sanding to do, you can see the layers of paint color that is underneath it. I think it's a white, a green, a yellow, but the bottom of the legs are definitely just chipping right off. So I'm going to do as much as I can with my power sanders and then move on to some hand sanding, which is, it's inevitable when it comes to spindles, but I'm trying to get the most of it off that I can and make it nice and smooth. Even though this one is not going to yellow on me, my white paint, yes, I'm going to be painting it white. I'm going to start with that red primer again. This primer is really nice. We've used the gray version of it before. It sticks really well to other paints and MDF board and plastics. So this has that. It was probably a latex paint, I'm guessing, on this, that really shiny paint that almost, when you're sanding it, just kind of scrapes off like a gummy substance. So I want to make sure that that is good and on and it's not affecting my final coat of paint. So now that this little stool is dry, and yes, it only took me one coat. Yes, there's some perfectly imperfect marks on it from all that layer of paint, but at least it's a clean paint job. So now I'm going back in with polycrylic to seal this all in before, yes, I'm going to add some of Reusable's decoupage paper to the top. I said previously, this is just an easy way to transform an item. Even though I loved doing green sand stripes and doing the stencil, look at, I got all that out on this paper. So don't forget to check my link down below of Sarah's store, where you can purchase all this beautiful paper. So now what I'm doing here is I'm deciding, okay, I want the number 7, I want the wording. I know it's not big enough to do the entire paper, but I'm just trying to get my main focus in there. Like before, I'm just going to go ahead and use polycrylic to glue it down. That I'm not going to cut anything off first, even though I'll have extra to do another project, a smaller project. I want to make sure that I've got this project covered and not cut myself shy. So just to be on the safe side, I'm going to go ahead and glue the whole piece down, even though it's not all going to be used, just to play it safe. Since this is one solid piece of decoupage paper, I'm not going to go ahead and spray it. I'm just going to brush on a couple coats of polycrylic to seal it in. Okay, how many of you are going, wait, Yvonne, that is half a chair. I hope that you did not pay for half a chair. Yes, I did. I had to pay 50 cents at a garage sale for this half a chair that had holes in it. I even think Chris thought I was more crazy than ever and could not see my vision. I guess we probably should deal with the holes first, because actually I don't have to glue it. It is actually solid. So what I have here is Durham water putty, which is a wood filler. It's just dry form, and I'm adding some ink, Waverly paint to this mixture along with the water to make a paste. And as you see, I taped off the bottom because it's a hole and I don't want it to go all the way through. So I'm going to mix this up as the regular wood filler, but just with a little bit of paint. So I like the holes. I don't want to cover them up. I want people to know that this used to be half of a chair. So why not accentuate them other than hide them? So that's why I painted my wood filler black. So it is quite the hole, so I'm going to have to fill it up, and I want to overfill it because as it dries it probably shrink just a little bit, and then I'm going to walk away and let it dry overnight. And as I'm sitting here editing for you all, thinking, you know, I could have put some tissue in there. I could have put some paper, some sawdust that I would not have had to fill it, and probably wait as long as I had to wait for this putty to dry. So just note to self, you can stick other stuff in there and then fill it up with the wood filler to cover it all up. So yes, if you guessed it, my wood filler was not dry by the next morning. Yes, I should have filled it in. So, but I'm going to work around that and get the rest of this sanded smooth while I have my sander out. But yes, I'm taking the top of this all the way down to raw wood. Sometimes you just work on pieces and parts of it and then proceed on with what you want to do while you're waiting for something else to dry. And even at the time, I may have covered up that wood filler, but it still wasn't dry underneath my contact paper and my tape. But sometimes you just move on, and eventually it will be dry. So for this piece, I did scuff sand the entire bottom that has watermarks on the very tips of those legs. So, but I wasn't worried about any bleed through or anything like that because I'm going to be, as it matching my wood filler, I'm going to be painting the bottom of this black with the Rust-Oleum paint and primer. Now after it was finally dry and I sanded it, it still had a little bit of a dip in it. So what I'm using here is the Starbond black glue. So what this is, it's almost like a little bit of an epoxy. So it's just going to make it so that it is nice and level, and then I will sand it again so it's nice and smooth. I cannot believe how I have transformed this little half a chair so far, but I have a little bit more detail work that I want to do. I want to add some small green sack stripes so it doesn't just look like I have two random holes peering at me. Kind of reminds me of one of those ghosts right now at this angle off of Pac-Man. Anyway, so I'm just using a 1/2-inch tape. I'm going to do 2 small stripes on each side, kind of similar to the first bench that I did. The fun of gray sack stripes is you can add big, you can add little, you can add a couple, you can add a lot. It's just, they're just fun, whatever your heart desires. Or if you don't want to do them by hand, you just order some of the recycle paper. Now I'm just using my ready-to-use black onyx and a stencil brush just to color these in. Now that first coat, because this wood is really raw and dry, it's just going to suck that in. So I'm going to have to go back over with a second coat. So now I'm going to add another striping set in the middle. So I did that smaller 1/2-inch tape, which is the same amount of what is unpainted in between each stripe, and then smaller ones to match the smaller ones that I put on. Now I want to make sure that there's not a bump for me doing this paint stripe. So I'm just taking some steel wool, but that wasn't quite enough. So I'm switching over some 220 sandpaper. I want to make sure that it is nice and smooth. And my reason for using that type of paint is because I'm going to be waxing over this. So if I would have used a chalk or my apple barrel paint, when I go to wax over this paint, it will just make it a hot mess. So just think about that, of how you're going to top it off. If I was just going to spray this with polycrylic, I could probably have done one of the other types of paint. Since Michelle was so kind to send me another can of this Varathane paint, you guys don't even know how happy I am. It's the little things that make us happy, and this is a huge thing. So just like before, I'm going to put that first coat on. I'm going to let it dry because it's really going to soak into this raw wood, and then I can go ahead and put that finished coat on. So you just apply it, you buff it off, and then let it sit for an hour so you can tell if it's grabbing your fingers, if it's not all absorbed in yet. So here is this piece. This was actually given to me by a friend from her mother-in-law's estate. Yes, and she is a fan of Ginger Chick and what we do as repainters of furniture. So she actually gave us this bench. Now, I did like the paint job, but I saw all the imperfections that stuck out. It's an old piece, and yes, it's not an original. It's probably a remake of a Hitchcock piece, so it is not original. There was no stamp, there was no date, and there was no anything that could tell me that it was that manufacturer. So I did a little poll on my Instagram, Facebook story to find out what everybody thought before I started to work on this piece, because I do try to do my homework, and a lot of times I turn away pieces because I won't paint them. I just want to share that with you all. So if you are sad that I am painting this piece, you might as well just turn off the video now and look away and come back at the end for the final reveal of all the pieces. But I am so sorry if that's how you feel. So, but it is a beautiful, well-made piece that just need some loving. So I think it was supposed to be cream maybe, but over time it has yellowed. It always had a chair pad on it. As you see, it has lots of scrapes and bruises, and it needs to be sanded here and there. That is an awful lot of spindles to have to sand, so I tried my best to get all the areas that had scratches and gouges and whatnot sanded smooth as I could, and now I'm just going to spray it with the same kind of spray primer, but this one is gray. I'm not worried about any bleed through with this piece. Could put that black onyx paint in my sprayer and spray this piece, but my dining room chairs that were oak that I sprayed a few years ago have wore really well, and this is the paint I used the whole process, so I know that this will be wonderful, that it just stays on. So yep, covering up that primer, even though the Rust-Oleum has paint and primer, just because I got down to some of that raw wood, I just thought, you know, why not? I hope I have inspired you to look at trash on the side of the road, those unwanted stools that the thrift stores will give away for a few bucks, or if somebody offers you an item to paint, that you take it. So thanks again for watching today's video, and as always, give me a quick comment of which one was your favorite. Mine probably had to be that chair that I got for 50 cents. That was no longer a chair, but I always love using Recycles paper, and that chicken and cow paper are always a hit, so I'm always going to make those over. And I know I'll probably take some slack about the yellow bench, but it was gifted to us. She wanted us to make it over, and it was not an original, and it had some damage. It wasn't in pristine condition, and I was hoping with my social media shout out that I would get a little bit of feedback or somebody wanted to just buy it, but as you see, that did not happen. So thanks for watching today's video, guys, and as always, if you're part of our YouTube family, thank you so much. And if you're new and you're checking out our content for the first time and you liked what you saw, please hit that subscription button along with the notification bell so you know when we've uploaded a new video. And we will see you next time, guys, and you can see what we're up to. Bye!